Hey guys, it's Ken, and we're back with another episode of kenfuTV. And today we're going to talk about belts and how that affects your martial training. So let's get started. Okay, so we're back, and you'll notice it looks a little different in here. I'm filming some other videos on some knives I'm reviewing that were sent to me by Ravencrest Tactical, so be sure to watch for those videos. In the meantime, we'll just use this setup to talk about belts and the martial arts and how all of that kind of came about and what that is all about anyway. Now, there is a lot of stuff going around where I've heard this in every dojo, from kids to adults. I've heard everybody say it. The black belt was because you got a white belt and you trained so hard that it got dirty and it turned black, and that's how you get the black belt. That was the old way to get your black belt. It's a very romantic idea, not necessarily an accurate one. Now, I can't cite exactly, there probably were people who did that. And I even know some people who, as they went through colored belts, they started with a white belt, and they would, the reason that their system progressed the way that it did was because they would dye them themselves. So they dye it yellow, then they would dye it blue or whatever, and it kind of get this weird kind of green color, and then you go green and then brown, and then, so each time a darker color that would allow you to override the last color until you had finally you dyed it black. That's cool. Kind of an interesting way to do it. Certainly has its own je ne sais quoi that goes with it. But let's talk about historically, right? So the gi, as we wear it and as we call it, though it's not very accurate, because in Japanese it wouldn't start with gi, it'd be like ki or something else. Typically it would only be called a gi if there was another word in front of it. So a lot of times you'll hear, if it's a more traditional speaking place, it might be the dogi or the keikogi, your judogi, all these different things. That's kind of how that works. So Jigoro Kano, founder of judo, precursor, he was the person who set that into being judo. Originally it was jiu-jitsu, not to be confused with Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Is it Japanese jiu-jitsu? People say, well, judo and jiu-jitsu, they're really similar, right? No, they're the same. Japan hit a peacetime. The idea of training for war and training for violence was very frowned upon. It wasn't very politically correct in the time. So at that time, they started calling it judo. It became the way of, rather than technical fighting. Jutsu is your techniques or your fighting method. They didn't really change what they were doing. They just focused on the building of character instead of the preparation for war. But the techniques they practiced, how they practiced them, the structure of the class, none of that changed. But the name changed, its perception in society changed, and that allowed for it to be more acceptable in society and in the community. Now, Jigoro Kano, he founded a number of changes that we continue in a lot of martial arts, that they were his. They happened because of him. And the first was the gi. Right? Originally, you didn't train in them. You look at the really old pictures and they're training literally in their underwear, something that they would wear under. When you wore a kimono in Japan, you would wear a light linen, what would look like a dogi, underneath there to keep the sweat off of the silks and things of your kimono. But they were really thin, really weak. They didn't train in those. They took that off. They'd take the kimono off. They'd take that off so it doesn't get torn or ripped, and then they'd train. That's how they'd go, right? And remember, oftentimes training was one-on-one. It was done in the evenings and things because depending on the time frame, the martial arts was banned. The government at the time didn't want to have their people armed and prepared to overthrow the government, so they took that away. So you train in the evenings, late at night, where it was harder for people to see that you were doing it. And you trained directly under your instructor or your master. When they called it that, it was kind of the bond, the contract. You do what I say, and I'll teach you what I know. You didn't question that. You chose that you wanted this from them. And even still, you were vetted, and there was control over how that information got passed, because it was dangerous. It was dangerous to teach that, because if it got out that you were doing that, the government could come after you as a threat to the government. So it wasn't, it was very, very different. So yeah, you come over, you'd get down to stuff that you weren't going to get dirty or torn, and you'd work hard, and then you get done, maybe get cleaned up, put that stuff back on, go home, and then live your normal day. Times change, things change. It became more acceptable to do this stuff. And judo at one point in history, and my timelines might not be exact, so I'm not going to bring any, but obviously at some point judo became the sport that tied together Japan. It was something that it was in their culture to bring everyone together. The Americans, we have our football, everybody gets excited about our football or our baseball. They had judo, and judo was the art of their people, the sport of their people, and that was something for everybody to rally up with. But anyway, where that fits, I don't exactly know. Any of you judo guys that maybe understand the history a little bit better than I do, drop it down in the comments. I'd love to know. I'd like to, if I'm getting some of this wrong, tell me. This is what I know. Now, Kano developed the judogi, and the judogi, it was, you know, your thicker canvas and your stuff to where you could grip and pull. You know, you just because you didn't train in a kimono didn't mean that you weren't going to be wearing one when you got attacked, and you could grab onto somebody and throw them by their clothes and do that kind of stuff. So he developed the gi, the judo gi, to be something that could be worn and trained in, that was sturdy and durable enough to be able to be thrown around and gripped and that kind of thing. You got to have something to tie it closed with. And so you had a belt, you know, so the gi was white or thereabout, and your belt was white or thereabout. And training was never about the color of your belt or what you wore and how you did all of that. Instead, training was about training. It was about learning the skills from the person that you were learning them from. And that was your focus. That's what you were working on. And you were just worried about keeping your judo-gi closed. So, which is why I personally find it really silly when I see someone wearing a belt over the top of their t-shirt. If they're wearing like gi pants and a t-shirt and they're wearing their belt over it, you have nothing to keep closed. So I find it kind of silly to put that on. It's either silly or it's about ego. This is my rank. Rather than showing you on the mat, I'm gonna wear it, even though I don't need to, so that you know what my rank is. And I'll come back to that because I have strong feelings about that too. But anyway, time went on, class grew, it was able to teach it more openly, and there became more students. Eventually it became, okay, I need a way to denote which one of my students are my senior students, so that I can point and go, hey, go work with that senior over there. You know, how do I make them know? Well, I'll put a black belt on them, so that way you've got everybody wearing their white belt, and then that one is wearing their black belt. So hey, if that's a senior student that I sent you to, go to the black belt. It wasn't a sign of mastery. It wasn't sign. It was just, this is your senior. This is somebody who has more knowledge, and this is who I'm sending you to talk to. That's it. We made it into a really big deal, but that's it. Okay, so time goes on. That is a popular methodology. You have a belt that ties your gi closed. Senior students are denoted with a black belt. That didn't necessarily make them an instructor. It just identified a senior student. Now, with that, time goes on, and there's no, I haven't found anything definitive when it talks about, you know, a lot of people say, well, we didn't start doing colored belts until it came to the West and we needed more motivation. You know, but colored belts happen outside of the West. It happened in Japan and stuff too. So I don't know where that started, but we can talk a little bit about how it kind of works. Jigoro Kano was also, you know, so I mentioned a couple things, right? He's the guy who developed the gi. He's the guy who developed the black belt and in its original form. But he's also the guy who attached rank to the martial arts. And he did that by appropriating the ranking system from the board game Go, the strategy game, really popular in that time and still pretty popular. Japanese game, but it was based, there's a Chinese version and a Korean version, you know, it's called Weiki and Baduk, and I may be pronouncing those wrong. Basically, strategy game from, it's something like 2,000-3,000 years old. It's crazy, but its ranking system goes like 30th Q up to first Q, and then first Dan up to 10th Dan. And so here's your Q Dan ranking system. The way that works is you'll sometimes hear Mudansha and Yudansha. Mudansha means without rank or without Dan, right? And then Yudansha means with Dan. So you have your ranks for the people who don't have a Dan rank yet, and then you have your ranks of the people who do have Dan ranks. Obviously, going from 30 to 1 is pretty crazy. So he set it up to be 10 to 1, 1 to 10. So 10th Q to first Q, first Dan to 10th Dan. And so you got your Q Dan ranking system. And so that was there all along. No matter what color your belt was, if you got, at least after he incorporated that, if you had a promotion to a fourth Q, your fourth Q, your belt didn't change colors, but your rank did. And it did according to your skill set that came with it. Over time, colors got assigned to the ranks, the Q, right? So once you were a black belt, you had just a black belt. But with the colored ranks, so you had a white belt, but then you would move through. So like my particular system, when I started it, I went white, yellow, blue, green, brown, black. That was the way that went. And there were stripe ranks in between. You know, there's a lot of different ways to do a ranking system. There's a lot of different methods people have used, and your system will be different. Everybody's system is different. And that actually brings up one of the issues that I see with it is right now, especially if you meet a non-martial artist, everybody knows somebody who's a black belt, either be what I would term a legitimate black belt or a 12-year-old black belt, but they know some kind of black belt. And the problem is as far as they're concerned, if the belt is black, that's that. They're pretty badass. They've got a black belt. When you get into, well, oh, I got my green belt, or I got my brown belt, or I got my whatever, when you get into that, well, some styles, those colors come early and then go, and then some of them that color comes late. So it's not really useful to know that unless you also know the ranking system that it came out of. So if you have nothing to compare it to, it's relatively useless information. You don't know, well, I almost had my green belt. Okay, well, what if green was your second rank? And what if my green belt was, and it wasn't, but what if my green belt was right before I went to black belt? It doesn't mean anything. It could be really confusing. I could be like, oh man, you almost had your green belt. That's crazy. Here's a really good example. The red belt. The red belt at some point became the thing that denoted the founder or the grandmaster. Some styles have red as an early rank even in their kids ranking or one of the first couple ranks. Okay, are you in your third rank or are you a grandmaster? If I go purely on belt color, there's no way to know. Fortunately, on the mat, we get to see, you know, but if you're just talking to somebody, they have no way to put that together in their mind. So it becomes arbitrary. Personally, I believe belts are pretty arbitrary. Color belts are useful. They do provide motivation. I believe it's an external motivation. It's giving you a goal to continue to drive for. Meanwhile, it's an external goal where I think you should be developing your personal internal goals, you know, your personal progress and those things which are not worn on the outside. It's all too easy for people to get attached to the idea of consistently getting a new thing that validates them. And that kind of breaks the whole building of character anyway, right? Karate-do, judo, aikido, anything with that do ending, the entire idea was that we were cultivating character. And if I'm cultivating character through a method that uses external reinforcement, well, then it's always, how do I get my next belt? Well, I didn't pass the test to get my other belt, so I'm not as good as I thought I was. And you know, these things are arbitrary. They're not who you are. They're not your character. They're not the progress you've made. They don't show those things. And in a way, it's kind of defeating the purpose a little bit. That said, you know, especially in children, the idea of having colored belts helps give them something visual that they can attach. It's like, you know, I remember in like elementary school, you got like stars that stuck on the wall on some kind of poster or something when you did something good or you got really good grades or whatever. Something that fed back, rewarding you. It was a reward system for rewarding you for when you did accomplish that thing. So, okay, so you get belts as a reward. A lot of times people don't understand that though, and they associate the reward with their skill. And they say, my skill is this belt, and then later, I don't deserve to be this belt because maybe I've been training for a while, or, well, I don't understand why so-and-so is wearing that belt. I'm better than so-and-so, and you know, and all of the ego continues to exist where it shouldn't. The belt should be an acknowledgement of your skill, but it's an unnecessary one. For an instructor, the belt helps categorize and separate. Back in the day, an instructor had 1-2 students. You know, they didn't take on a lot. They tried to pass everything they had to a couple people. Once group classes happen, you know, you need some sort of system. You need some sort of mechanic that allows for that to work properly. So having belts, being like, okay, I'm going to have all the yellow belts work together. I'm going to have all the blue belts work together. And all the green belts work together. Yeah, it makes sense. It's a way to do that. It's a way to handle a larger group. It also gives the students themselves the ability to know so-and-so is a belt higher than me, so there's someone I can ask questions to, or I can ask them to help me on the stuff that I'm trying to work on. It gives them that understanding. It gives them some awareness of who's where and who to talk to for that stuff. So that it is beneficial for those reasons. I already mentioned for children, it keeps them motivated because when you're young, it's really easy to get pulled into other things and lose interest. And when things get hard, when things plateau, when you hit those points that you have to struggle to get through, which is a character development of its own, the belt can help. It can help make you feel like you've accomplished something. It takes an inwardly strong person to function without having something external telling you how you're doing. but it also forces you to not need to develop that internal strength. So there's pluses and minuses there. Disadvantages I see with the belt: color system, the tendency to compare ourselves to each other, which we're always going to do, but it just facilitates it. And ego, you get to a certain belt and maybe there's not a lot of people who have that belt, so you're kind of a badass, you're a big deal. Sometimes you start putting that in front of other people and maybe even pushing them down, which is kind of the exact opposite of what should be happening. As you do better, as you go forward, you should be helping bring people with you, not putting them down for not being as good as you. Ego is kind of a big deal. You get people that will look at, and I had this in my school, students that would look next to each other. They'd see somebody who promoted and they go, well, my kata is way better than that person's kata. Like, I don't understand why they have a green belt and I'm still a blue belt. I don't understand why, I can fight better than they can. I don't understand why they have this belt and I have this belt, or I should be having that. And kind of this entitlement, this big ego problem. What's kind of failed to be understood is the fact that it's not a mystery. Your rank is an acknowledgement of your skill. Your rank is not your skill. Let me explain that. You go to class 3 times a week, every week for 10 years. You work hard, you show up, you train, you continue, but you never get tested. You never have somebody wrap another belt around your waist. Does that mean you didn't learn anything? Similarly, on the other side, you've trained for a long time, you have a black belt or whatever color belt. You go to a new school and it gets taken away. Does that mean you suddenly forget everything that you know how to do and you lose all of your skills? No. Those are who you are. Those are built in. That's something that you've cultivated and developed that you can't even turn off if you want to. It's just part of you. So the belt has literally nothing to do with your ability. So your belt or your rank, getting it just acknowledges that is true about you, that you have this ability, this skill. And maybe lets other people know that, who are going to be working with you, gives them an idea of what to expect when they work with you. And that's great. That's a great mechanic. I personally believe in the rank method, not the belt method. So there came a point when I took over the school that I teach in now. In our karate system, I moved to a white and black belt. And there's even other colors. We haven't even talked about the fact that once after black belt, there's different. There's white and red, there's black and red, there's stripes going this way, there's stripes going this way. There's a lot of different things. We're not even talking about that. I mean, there's just, depending on the system, there could be, 30 belts. And there could be systems that have 3. It's completely unique to that system. But so I went to a system that had white belts right up until you wore a black belt. Kind of, in a way, a very traditional way. I mean, we're going back to the old tradition of just wearing a belt to keep your dogi closed. And when you achieved a status as a senior student, a high-level senior student, you wear the black belt instead. And notice I said senior student, not the teacher. Just having a black belt doesn't make you a good teacher. Having a black belt doesn't make you the boss, doesn't put you at the end and go, hey, I've made it. I'm done. No, you just barely have started to understand how to use your body. You've got the basics in you. You understand the material. Now it's time to start truly diving deep and getting to understand what's actually even happening and what's actually even trying to be taught to you. It's like your birthday. When your birthday comes around, people are like, you're another year older. In reality, you're another day older, because yesterday you were 364 days older than you were at your last birthday. Today you're 365. You didn't go a year overnight. It's just a day. 1 day's difference. You're acknowledging that it's an anniversary of your birth, but it's not a huge jump. It was 1 day. You went from yesterday not being your birthday to today being your birthday. It's an awareness. It's an acknowledgement of that. So same thing here. When I put this on and that day happened, it wasn't any different. I mean, I know that's a big bubble burst for some people, but the truth is I was already there. I'd already trained. And I mean, the difference from going from, in that case, a brown belt, a first Q to a first Dan, the difference was my teacher acknowledged that that's where I was. And we've had conversations about it. I was probably at that, for weeks before we tested. It was something that he could see in me already. The test is the formality. Going, okay, let's test this out. Let's make sure. And in a lot of ways, the test is for, and maybe I'll make more video on testing, but the test is more for the teacher. It's a good test of you. Can you handle this? But it's also a test for the teacher. Have I given you what you should have by now? I'm seeing your ability. I'm seeing your skill. I'm seeing what you're capable of. But do you have the things that I also was kind of expecting you to have by now? If not, that's a failure on my part. I need to get you those things. It's not a sign of your skill. It's a sign of whether or not you were taught that properly. It didn't change. who I was, my abilities. I mean, it's not like overnight I became better at doing the things that I do. It wasn't that I suddenly had all the answers and had all this stuff. No, it was literally one strap of cotton difference. People looked at me differently, but I was the same person. My abilities were not improved. My understanding was not improved. This didn't do that. Training did. Showing up and working and asking questions and continuing to improve what I had is what did it. Not this. You know, and I don't even always wear this. I have a white belt. Sometimes I wear that. I like the white belt. It reminds you of that exciting time when you very first started your art and everything was awesome. Everything was new. Everything was exciting because you didn't know any of it. Every bit of it was something new and exciting. And sometimes it's just fun to kind of put the belt on and go, yeah, let's remember what it's like to not be bored with this, to not know everything, to realize that it's not, and there's so much more to learn. You know what? There's never been a time I've put on a white belt since this that anybody's looked at me and said, that guy's never done anything before. And guess what? When that guy walks on the mat and he's put on a white belt, you don't know if he doesn't have a 5th degree black belt somewhere else. You don't know that. You don't know what his skill set is. You don't know that he might not have any martial training at all, but he's been military for the last 15 years and he's got a skill set that he can apply. A white belt can be really misleading, can be really deceiving, and you can't do it off of that. So it's got to be proven off the mat. You will see it on the mat. You want people to know who you are and what you're capable of? Show them. Do it. When you work with somebody, work at that level. Work appropriately. Have the skill you have the power you have all of those attributes that you've worked to cultivate, whether you're wearing a belt or not. You don't take off the belt and then suddenly you can't do that stuff anymore, right? This isn't a cartoon. This isn't Power Rangers where I've gotta go all morphin time and now it's time for me to have a suit on and be able to do all this badass stuff. Nope. The abilities are always there all the time. People notice. I went to a seminar in an art I've never done before, judo, actually. Wore a white belt because it's not my school. I don't have rank in that. I believe that it's appropriate to be humble and set aside the fact that I have knowledge somewhere else. Just because a chef is a really good chef doesn't mean he's the boss in the garage at a mechanic shop. They're different skills, right? But there were comments made later. I found people going, hey, to somebody I know that was there with me. They're going, hey, who is this guy? Where does he train at? It was obvious to them that I had training. Not necessarily that I could do the stuff that they were doing or that I had training specifically in judo, but I said, this guy has knowledge. He's got something. He's not a white belt. We don't know what he is, but he's not a white belt. So people notice. It's irrelevant whether you show it to them with this. Show it to them with how you move and what you do and how you're able to carry yourself. Show it to them with your humility. You know, as you continue to progress, it shouldn't be more ego because you have a belt. It should be more humility and more paying attention to the people around you rather than people need to pay attention to me instead. So that should be happening as you increase in rank. So show them that too. That should be happening. You're not, just because you have a black belt. You know, I knew somebody who there was a black belt club in their martial art, and when they went to dinner, you didn't sit with the black belts. That was the black belt's table, and that's a bunch of bullshit. Is how I feel about it. You work all this hard, you do all this stuff. That's what you've done. That's what you've put into it. You get what you get because you put it in, right? You want to do well in the martial arts, then do well in the martial arts. Practice, train, work hard, ask questions, develop. Don't just order a belt. I mean, if you order a belt, it's not going to make you any better. So the idea of segregating and going, yeah, we're not going to give anybody the chance to talk to us because we're black belts. That's some garbage, some absolute garbage. And I don't agree with it. You know, lastly, this still doesn't mean anything. The fact that it's sitting on this table, first off, don't even know if it's mine. I could have just set this on the table. Just because this is sitting here doesn't mean you know anything about that. You know, like I said, there's 12-year-old black belts. They started when they were 8. Did they really develop what I would consider a black belt skill in those couple of years? No. Hell, you don't even have a body that you can truly utilize for those skills yet. There's time that has to take place. There's literally physical development that has to take place. There is a time when this is relevant. And so people that I've met that know my instructor, that find out I have a black belt under him, it means something because they know him. They know what his expectations were. They know what he trains like. They know what his students look like. And so this means something. But if I go somewhere else, I go, yeah, I got a black belt under so-and-so, and you go, who's that? It doesn't tell you anything. You don't learn anything from that. It's not giving you anything. So the only time that that's valuable is if the person you're telling knows your instructor or knows the person or organization that gave this to you and what those standards look like. So even just having a black belt, people tell me all the time, you know, yeah, I've got a black belt and so. you know, or whatever. As they come, maybe they come train or do whatever, and they tell me I have a black belt. You know, I acknowledge it, and that's great. At least it's like having a degree. They say, what do you call a medical student that got all D's in school or whatever? Doctor. You know, so I mean, you could be the person who graduated top of their class or bottom of their class, and the degree still says what it says. The belt, you could be the person who just barely made the cut and doesn't work hard, but you did it, you got one. Or you could be the person who excelled and worked hard and is a good example of what is possible and what a good example of the school. Saying you have a black belt doesn't deliver all of the rest of that information. So I never let that be the thing that defines my opinion of your ability. I wait until I get you on the mat, and then I just watch and just see, how do you behave? What is your etiquette like? How do you treat other people? What does your ability look like? What does your skill look like? Are you fast? Are you powerful? Are you capable in categories? Because that's the other thing, is everybody's different, right? I can have two black belts stand right next to each other and they might be entirely different. One might be an incredible fighter who that's their deal, and another might be incredible at the technical details and can really dial in and pull out of a person what they're capable of, but maybe aren't as good at doing it themselves. But no difference, right? They're both wearing a black belt. So who I go to ask a question is going to be based on what they're good at, not just because they're a black belt. When we went to all white belts in the school, I noticed that the rivalry and the ego fell off dramatically. People kind of forgot. In fact, for a while, we completely forgot to test it all. It just wasn't even a thing we were paying attention to. Everybody just showed up, ready to learn, excited, and trained hard. And that's how it should be. I mean, yeah, you should still test and you should still do all that stuff. But the thing is, even if you're not testing, you're improving, you're developing that no matter what. And so what I found is people helped each other more. People paid more attention to just the development of themselves and the people around them. And that's pretty awesome. And that only happens when we take this and we set it aside and we don't worry about it anymore. We don't make that the focus of what we're doing. It hopefully wasn't the thing we focused on when we started. And hopefully it isn't the thing we focus on as we continue. At the end of the day, here's the thing, every rank that you get gets harder. You know, maybe I look back at some certificates and things, and maybe it took me a month to get the first one and then a month and a half to get the second one or whatever, you know, and each time it's longer. Now it's 2 months, now it's 6 months, now it's 10 months, now it's a year and a half. You know, each one took longer than the last one. Guess what? If you think motivation is difficult in that colored belt system, just wait till your belt is this color. Years before you even think about having a different one. And guess what? When that time comes, it's still the same color. Doesn't change. You know, there's plenty of people that train with me that don't even know what rank I am because I don't care. At the end of the day, if they get on the mat and they look and they go, I want to learn something from this guy because of what he's capable of or what his opinions are, or his philosophy on it, or whatever it is, that's what's important. Not this. It tells you nothing. So that's that. That's what I got. Hit me up in the comments. Tell me, what was it like when you got your black belt, or what is that the thing that you're going for? And tell me if some of this stuff rang true for you, or tell me if some of this stuff you hated hearing me say it because you don't believe in it. And let's talk about it. In the meantime, that's it for now. This is kenfuTV. Subscribe for more stuff like this. Hit that bell to know when it's out. Watch for the videos that I just am coming out with on these knives that I've got this set up for. And that's it for now. See ya.